Center. My name is Paulo Sotero. I am the director of the Brazil Institute here at the center. On behalf of the Brazil Institute, the Asia program and the Africa program of the Wilson Center, I'd like to say that it's a pleasure to greet you here this morning. We have as a co-sponsor of this event the International Center on Child Labor and Education. The topic, as you know, is policy lessons from India, Brazil, and South Africa on development and implementation of national plans of action on elimination of child labor. This will be the second event that the Brazil Institute organizes with our Asia and Africa programs, focusing on this new forum of countries, India, Brazil, and South Africa, the three great democracies of the South. We had last year a conference to explain what IPSA is, what it intends to be. We were supposed to have a couple of people here that won't be able to come because of the cloud, because of the volcano, which tells you something about the need of more South-South connections. It is our privilege to have here Ambassador Mira Shankar, Ambassador of India to the United States. I will just briefly read points of each person's biography, but you have a summary of their biographies here. We have also the privilege to have with us Minister Carlos Roberto Lupi, Minister of Labor in Brazil, Labor and Employment, and also Minister Membatisi Midladlana. I will, by the end of the conference, I will pronounce Italian. His name. Is it acceptable?
Yeah.
Thank you, Minister. We were supposed to have with us today Minister Mallikarjun Kharge from India, Minister of Labor, and also a friend from the Global Chair from the March Against Child Labor, Kailash Katyarthi. Those two were caught by the cloud, are in some airports around the world. The ministers of labor are in town for a G20 Minister of Labor that starts today. And I'm very grateful to Ambassador Shankar that she could, on a very short notice, join us to present the points of view of her great country, India, on what India is doing regarding this very tough issue that all developing countries, and not all in developing countries, some even developed countries face. I would like to invite just briefly our co-host, Sudhanshu Joshi, to say a couple of words before we start giving each of our speakers a sort of an opportunity to make an opening statement.
Thank you, Paulo. I think you captured the sort of essence of the mood in the IPSA Labor Ministers panel here. We are meeting here at a very opportune time because the IPSA heads of the state summit just concluded in Brasilia. The Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said at the end, addressing to the media, that the IPSA forum is meeting at a time when the world is facing the global financial crisis, and the IPSA countries and the IPSA partnership is a strong moral voice in this unsettled world. The South African President, Jacob Zuma, he said that his participation in the IPSA forum was inspirational. and the Brazilian counterpart, the host, gracious President Lula. He reiterated that the IPSA partnership is a partnership between equals. And he also retorted that the United Nations should promote the growth of South-South partnership and adapt to this new changing world order. I would take 2 minutes, Paulo, to put the perspective, the issues in perspective here, that why we are meeting, because that would really be very important to explain. So, I represent here the global advocacy of Global March Against Child Labor, a worldwide movement of NGOs, teachers, and trade unions. Global March welcomes the opportunity to discuss some of the key policy lessons learned in the elimination and prevention of child labor by 3 leading continental states, India from Asia, Brazil from the Americas, and South Africa from Africa. This panel discussion is taking place on the eve of a major global event focusing the attention of the international community on the challenge of eliminating child labor and how to accelerate, expand, and improve efforts to achieve this vital development goal. The Global Conference on Child Labor is being co-organized by the International Labour Organization and the Ministry of Social Affairs and Employment of the Dutch government, and will be held in The Hague on 10th and 11th of May 2010. Its significance must not be underestimated by the global community, as it will effectively map out a strategic plan to support the elimination of the worst forms of child labor by 2016 and underpin a broader ambition of eliminating all forms of child labor probably soon. This ambitious goal must be integrated into related human development frameworks, including the Millennium Development Goals, education for all, and the PRSPs. It is the understanding here that these 3 countries, India, Brazil, and South Africa, they have to contribute in the development of this roadmap, because these 3 countries, they bring one of the most comprehensive experiences since the very inception of the international program on elimination of child labor, which started in 1992. This program has been able to support many member states in terms of analyzing, developing, and improving national policy and legislative frameworks, and in implementing projects focusing on the withdrawal of child laborers from hazardous work situations and linking them and their families with vital support services to ensure that do not return to work. This conference in The Hague is going to be probably one of the first opportunity after many years to be able to critically reflect on what should be the roadmap. And these 3 countries, India, Brazil, and South Africa, politically will bring the greatest expertise in The Hague. And it is why that we thought that the best opportunity here in Washington, D.C., in conjunction to this G20 Labour Ministers Conference here, would be for us to hear from them as to how they are trying to position themselves in this conference and how they are going to bring a kind of an IPSA perspective into the casting of this roadmap. With this, I leave it to Paul. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, I would like to invite Ambassador Mira Shankar to give us a sense of how India confronts this problem, how it's facing it, and then we would hear from Minister Lupi, and then from the Minister Latlana.
Eu não falo inglês, como é que faz você?
Não pode fazer.
Ele leu bem.
Mr. Paul Sotero, Mr. Sudhanshu Joshi, honorable ministers from Brazil and South Africa. I am standing in for Minister Kharge, who, as I said, has been prevented from coming here because of the volcanic cloud over Europe. But that doesn't mean that our approach to this issue is clouded. I'm glad to participate in this roundtable on policy lessons to be learned from our respective national experiences of addressing the issue of child labor. I commend this initiative to discuss and identify programs which have worked well and may have relevance as we work towards our objective of elimination of child labor. I would like to share with you India's perspective on this issue. We have a strong commitment to tackle the problem of child labor effectively. We are determined to eradicate child labor in the country. India has followed a proactive policy with respect to the problem and has clear constitutional and statutory provisions and is constantly developing measures to combat it. Our Constitution provides for protection of children from involvement in economic activities and vocations unsuited to their age. Suitable provisions in the fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy strongly reiterate this commitment. The legislative framework is provided by the Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Act of 1986, which has been amended to ban employment of children below the age of 14 years in factories, mines, and hazardous employments, and to regulate the working conditions in other permissible employments. This list has been progressively expanded and now includes 16 hazardous occupations and 35 processes that are specified under the Act where employment of children is completely prohibited. This prohibited list is being continuously reviewed and expanded. Government has also prohibited employment of children as domestic workers in hotels and restaurants since October 2006. Some of the programs for welfare and development of children being implemented by the Government of India focus attention on children who are more than 14 years of age also. Constitutional and legislative provisions providing protection to children against employment have been elaborated in the National Child Labour Policy announced in 1987. The policy addresses the complex issue of child labour in a comprehensive, holistic and integrated manner. The National Child Labour Project Scheme is being implemented in areas of high concentration of child labour. The scheme envisages running of special schools for child labour withdrawn from work, where the children are provided education along with vocational training, a stipend, supplementary nutrition and health checkups. The scheme started in 1988 in 13 endemic child labour districts. Its coverage has progressively increased to 271 districts now. There are around 9,000 national child labour project schools being run in the country. Voluntary organizations and NGOs are being financially assisted for taking up action-oriented projects for rehabilitation of working children. A core group of ministries of the Government of India has been formed for convergence of schemes at the national level. A working group set up to recommend an appropriate tracking and monitoring system of child labour covered under this scheme has made important recommendations in its report, which inter alia include developing a model child profile card. Government of India has taken an important step by making the right to education a fundamental right for children under the Constitution by inserting Article 21A. Every child in the age group of 6 to 14 years is to be provided free and compulsory education. The government has accordingly launched a countrywide campaign of education for all called the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan for providing education to children in this age group. We are also trying to cover the poor families living below the poverty line under various poverty alleviation and employment generation schemes by following the convergence approach so that they are not compelled by financial circumstances to send their children to work. A major initiative has been the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which is being implemented to provide a minimum 100 days of assured employment in a year to at least one adult in every rural household below the poverty line. This scheme, which started in 200 or so of the poorest districts on a pilot basis, has been recently expanded to cover the entire country and is making a huge impact in reducing rural vulnerabilities. We are vigilant about child labor being engaged for producing items of export. In our country, Human Rights Commission, the judiciary, and the administrative machinery are sensitized and very much involved in elimination of child labor. We have always maintained that trade and labor standards should not be linked, and they should be viewed separately because this problem is intrinsically linked to overall development and poverty alleviation. However, we also take vigilant action if incidents of child labor are brought to our attention or for enforcement. India was the first country to join the international program on elimination of child labor launched by the ILO in 1991 to work towards effective abolition of child labor. On the issue of non-ratification of the ILO Child Labor Convention 138 and 182, our position is that we need to have our existing laws and practices in full conformity before we would be in a position to implement these conventions. The Child Labor Conventions specify the age of entry to employment as 18 years. As of now, a sequential approach is being followed in India for elimination of child labor in a comprehensive, holistic, and integrated manner. The right to education has been guaranteed to all children up to the age of 14 years. Different ministries of the government are working towards evolving a consensus in existing legislations and national practices to achieve a society free from child labor. The issue of ratification of the Child Labor Conventions has been discussed in India at tripartite meetings, and based on their recommendations, 2 subgroups under the Technical Advisory Committee have been formed to consider the issue in detail. The recommendations, proposals of these subgroups are being examined by the government, which is actively engaged in deliberating this issue. Children, who constitute a very large segment of our society, are undeniably our assets and our future. Hence, they need to be taken care of and nurtured in their natural place, that is the school and the playground. This is the goal towards which the government policies and programs in India are aimed. I think I would just add here that our experience has been that really you need to have a holistic approach. A pure legislative or enforcement-oriented approach does not work. It has to address the core issues of development, so it has to be situated within an overall framework of economic growth. If you don't have growth, you're unable to achieve the issues of poverty alleviation. And when in India, we have now achieved a growth rate which is accelerating, but the challenge for the government is to ensure that this growth is not limited to certain sections of the people, but becomes inclusive. So there is targeted government action on a range of social policies designed to ensure the achievement of this objective of inclusive growth. Now, within this overall framework of addressing economic growth and addressing larger problems of social development and uneven development and poverty alleviation, we also need targeted programs for encouraging children to be in school and to prevent them from working. So our experience has been that purely looking at it from one angle doesn't work. We need a comprehensive approach which addresses issues of economic and social development. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I would like now to call Minister Lupi to say a few words. We are going to do consecutive translation, so we have the interpreter here, and so you would just bear with us. Minister Lupi.
Fala devagarzinho para tu repetir. Good morning. Don't know tradução. Peço desculpas por não falar inglês, mas eu ainda estou numa fase de crescimento e um dia eu pretendo aprender a língua universal.
I apologize to all of you because I still don't speak English, but it's one of my purposes, one of my goals to be able to learn English.
Mas não estou no trabalho infantil.
But nothing absolutely to do with child labor in this regard, my learning.
Bom, primeiro eu queria saudar a nossa embaixadora da Índia. Será que não era melhor tu ali, sentado? Que aí vai traduzindo automático? Está funcionando? Deixa eu testar.
Oops. Você pode vir aqui.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2. It is working. I'm sorry. It's my fault. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Saudar a nossa embaixadora da Índia, nosso ministro da África do Sul, nosso embaixador, as representações que organizam esse evento.
I'd like to, first of all, to greet the ambassador from India and the ambassador from South Africa and the people who have organized this event.
Eu gostaria de só dar 3 dados importantes para nós fazermos uma reflexão sobre eles e depois rapidamente dar uma opinião pessoal que não é conflitante com a realidade de cada um dos países presentes, mas que guarda as diferenças locais.
There are 3 main points that I would like to highlight in order to place our discussion in context, and then I will go on and expand a little more with my own observations.
No Brasil, de 2006 a agora 2008, o último dado que nós temos do IBGE, ok? De 2006 a 2008, nós tivemos de 2.713.000 jovens, crianças, diminuído para 2.144.000 jovens encontrados em serviços, em trabalho abaixo da idade estabelecida na lei, que é 15 anos de idade.
We have in Brazil 2,700,000 children, and it decreased for 2,400,000 children who are working below the level which is foreseen by the legislation, which is 15 years old.
A maioria ainda do sexo masculino, 1.447.000 jovens homens, meninos, e 697.020 jovens meninas.
Of these numbers, we have 1.4 million who are men, and 690 girls in this category that I mentioned.
Tendo uma realidade que deve ser parecida com o que acontece na África do Sul e na Índia, 51% desses jovens são trabalhos não remunerados, ou seja, são crianças que trabalham com a sua própria família.
The reality that we face in Brazil, it's pretty much, I'm sure, what happens in India. 51% of these children are the children who do not live with their family.
Esse decréscimo,
Just one second. No, what he said is that 51% of these people work in with their families, so they do not make money out of this work.
esse dado é o principal para nós raciocinarmos das políticas públicas. Nós temos 51%, repetindo, ou seja, a maioria dessas crianças que trabalham em áreas agrícolas ou com a família. Ou seja, muito difícil a fiscalização para essa área.
I reported there.
51% dessas crianças que trabalham com a família em casa, em pequenas propriedades rurais, não recebem remuneração. E por isso é muito difícil a fiscalização dentro dessas casas, dessas famílias.
51% of these children, they do not receive any remuneration, and it is very extremely difficult to enforce this piece of the legislation.
Because they work in rural areas, they work in farms.
O grande desafio é nós conseguirmos chegar a essa realidade. Por quê? Essas famílias normalmente são pequenas propriedades em setores agrícolas que têm grande dificuldade de não contar com a ajuda do seu filho na produção daquilo que é a garantia do seu sustento, da sua sobrevivência.
The main hindrance is the fact that these children are not able to count with the support of their family members in carrying out the work that they do.
Esse, portanto, é o principal desafio.
This is the main challenge.
Nós temos 4 atuações que estão fazendo o Brasil diminuir esse impacto de crianças no trabalho.
There are 4 plans that we are currently implementing in Brazil which are helping to reduce the number of children in child labor.
Primeiro, o crescimento da economia, já falado pela nossa embaixadora da Índia, que com o crescimento da economia se cresce a distribuição de renda e diminui a necessidade de ter criança no trabalho.
First of all, as the ambassador from India has pointed out, is the sheer growth of the economy, because with the improvement of the overall economy, this situation also is in some respect mitigated.
Quanto mais melhora a situação econômica, quanto melhor renda, quanto mais salário, menos criança trabalhando.
As the economic situation of the country overall improves, of course, then the resultant effect is that we'll have a fewer number of children in child labor.
Políticas sociais, ou seja, políticas focadas, direcionadas a incentivar que a criança esteja na escola e não no trabalho.
So we have social policies geared to have the children remain in school so that they will, this way, will not be going to a work situation.
O principal modelo é o chamado Bolsa Família.
The main model that we have in this respect is called Family Scholarship.
Que atinge hoje em torno de 12 milhões de famílias.
And this program benefits about 12 million families.
E em torno de 40 a 45 milhões de pessoas entre crianças e adultos.
And it benefits overall between the children and adults about 45 million people.
Essas crianças beneficiárias com suas famílias do Bolsa Família recebem uma ajuda de custo para que a criança fique na escola. Tem que apresentar um boletim, um certificado de que está estudando com as notas.
And these children, they have to show a report card to show that they are attending school and to show their grades. And they receive, as a result of this, they receive a stipend.
Agora, não basta ter um incentivo se não fiscalizarmos.
It's not enough to have just this incentive, this scholarship, if we have no means to enforce.
E se não dermos educação de qualidade para essas crianças que necessitam estar na sala de aula.
And also, if we are not able to provide quality education for these children to remain in classrooms.
Então, os 2 outros focos são educação de qualidade para todos.
So, the one main aspect is quality education for everyone.
Como a educação para essa faixa etária é responsabilidade dos municípios.
As the responsibility for this age group is a responsibility of the municipalities.
Nós estamos mais do que dobrando nossos investimentos nas redes municipais para melhorar a condições das escolas públicas municipais para essas crianças.
We are duplicating the investments that we make in this field in order to provide a situation and to improve this very purpose, to keep the children in classrooms.
E por parte do Ministério do Trabalho, o quarto foco é fiscalização.
And the fourth aspect on our Ministry of Labor has to do with enforcement and oversight.
Nós temos uma ação integrada de um grupo especial para fiscalizar o trabalho indecente, o trabalho explorador das crianças.
We have a special group which is dedicated to oversee what we called non-appropriate work for children.
Esse grupo foi criado a partir de 2007.
This group was established in 2007.
Começou com 981 ações de fiscalizações.
We carried out 981 oversight measures.
E ano passado terminamos com 1.240 ações diferentes de fiscalização no Brasil inteiro.
And last year we had in the entire country 1,240 such actions.
Essa fiscalização é feita através de planejamento feito pelo Ministério do Trabalho ou denúncias através de listagem gratuita para qualquer setor do Brasil do Ministério do Trabalho.
And this oversight is done by a direct initiative of the Ministry of Labor, or also when people call to denounce, there is a toll-free number that people can call to make a denunciation that there is such activity going on.
Bom, então, para terminar a minha modesta contribuição, eu penso que nós precisamos cada vez mais aproximar, sem nuvens, a relação Sul-Sul.
So in order to straighten the South-South cooperation, we really have to get into an environment to strengthen our relationship and hopefully a cloudless relationship.
Guardado o respeito à autonomia de cada nação.
Of course, take into account the respect to the sovereignty and the autonomy of each nation.
Mas conscientes que a criança é o futuro de toda a humanidade. E se não dermos condições a eles serem adultos, preparados, educados e informados, nós não teremos jamais um mundo feliz.
And of course, all this bearing in mind that the children are the future of humanity, and if we do not care and do all that is within our power, we will not have a happy humankind ahead of us.
Thank you very much.
I'd like now to call the minister from South Africa. Would you like to, Minister Lalana?
Thank you very much, Program Director. All the more I'm convinced that the South-South relations have to be strengthened, in particular in our ministries of labor. Our heads of state have done very well, and other ministries have done very well. And I would hate to confess that it is the first time that as ministers of labor we have an interaction of this nature. So I want to thank the organizers. I know it because I've been a minister for 12 years now. And so in the same ministry. So I know that this is one area where we have let down our own people in the South. The South African Constitution provides that children under 18 have a right to be protected from work that is exploitative, hazardous, or otherwise inappropriate for their age and detrimental to their schooling or detrimental to their social, physical, mental, spiritual, or moral development. Of course, we know that work in itself is not necessarily harmful in certain areas, especially if it is beneficial to the child, or if it takes into consideration the cultural views and cultural diversity which differ from community to community. For example, household chores and activities such as water fetching that can be beneficial if done in moderation, provided it is done in moderation, However, such household chores can become problematic when they are done in a manner that interfere with the child's development, which results in a child missing school or does not allow a child to do school homework or allowed to play with other children. We have ratified in South Africa the ILO Admission to Employment Convention of 1973. We also assisted in drafting the Worst Forms of Child Labor Convention of 1999, which we subsequently ratified in the year 2000. And I'm sure all of us know that that convention covers commercial sexual exploitation of children, the trafficking of children, the use of children by others in illegal activities, a work which by its nature or the circumstances in which it is carried out is likely to harm the health and safety and the morals of the child. As a country, we do acknowledge that we still have isolated incidences of child labor. Child prostitution, for instance, we still have that problem, child trafficking, and some of the cases of hazardous work done by children. Right, as I speak, we have identified with our enforcement inspectors in particular 30 cases of child labor that we have given to our prosecution authority that indicates that we have isolated incidences of that nature. Our statistics indicate that these incidences are lower than those of other developing countries. However, this did not mean that we must rest on our laurels. As a country, we are taking steps to eliminate all these isolated incidences and the worst forms of child labor and to contribute towards the ILO global target to eradicate worst forms of child labor by 2016. We work closely with social partners in that country in order to deal effectively with child labor, amongst others. Parliament has passed the Children's Act to deal explicitly with child trafficking, children used by adults to commit crime, and the commercial sexual exploitation of children. The President has even appointed a minister specifically to deal with children and people with disability. We have the Child Justice Act to fight and preventing worst forms of child labor. We have provisions in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act that deals with child labor. We have introduced a child labor program of action. Unfortunately, I only have one copy because we must not be overloaded in our bags. And that's the only reason why I'm carrying one copy of this child labor program, which does not only involve the Ministry of Labor, it involves all other ministries that are relevant to children. We have commenced with a wide range of programs that are directly and indirectly aimed at improving the situation of children, addressing poverty through no-fee schools, school feeding schemes, early childhood development programs, access to basic services such as water, and we're rolling out grants that benefit children. We're currently working on our national capacity to strengthen and enforce our legislative measures. I'm very pleased to record that the prevention of child labor approaches that we've followed in South Africa is being adopted and rolled out by a number of our neighboring states, such as Botswana, Namibia, and Lesotho. We currently also have a memorandum of understanding with one neighbor, which sometimes is always attacked in the world, Zimbabwe. And because many of the people of that country are flooding into our country, so we have no escape of this problem. But what we have done has found resonance in these countries, and we are happy with that fact. And the fact that it has attracted also sponsorship from the International Labour Organization. It is my wish that all the sub-Saharan African states and the entire African continent could follow suit so that we completely eradicate child labor in the continent. even though we still have poverty in the continent, it doesn't mean that we must continue with child labor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nelson. Well, let me confess to you about something about this topic. I started working at 14, so I am a former child laborer. But I worked in the formal sector. I had an identity card, I had a contract, and I think what Ambassador Mira Shankar just mentioned about the efforts of India and the other countries, obviously, is to formalize this activity, to allow it in a regulated framework, because I tell you, starting working at 14, one of the greatest things I ever did. I'm a journalist, I was a correspondent for many years, and I always tell people that I learned as much in those days at work, dealing with the bureaucracy in Brazil. I'm a master at that. We have a lot of bureaucracy, and it prepares you to be a journalist, I assure you. But what I would like to open up the questions here is to invite each of the presenters to tell us a little bit, to share with us what, in this process of dealing with this problem, what have you learned? For instance, policies that you tried and it may not have worked, and then you modify those policies and achieve better results. Because I think the beauty of this, having the three countries together, the three democracies of the South, is that you have this possibility of sharing experiences because you have the right software in place. We know in Brazil that we have the problem, but as we just learned from India and from South Africa, like those two countries, people are not just looking at the problem. They are really fighting it, and you can see the results. But I would like to start inviting Ambassador Shankar, if you could think of issues that, in the process of adopting those policies are very difficult. What has India and then Brazil and South Africa learned, and that led you to change and to become more efficient, to obtain more results in that area?
I think that for India, it's really been to identify the districts in which child labor is endemic, and then to have a holistic approach, because merely prohibiting child labor doesn't achieve the impact. As your minister said, we have to ensure that the children who are taken out of child labor are provided educational facilities. We have to ensure that their families are given some incentives to keep the children in school. And we have to ensure schemes which reduce the economic vulnerability of the families, which led them to cause their children to work in the first place. So I think a holistic approach really is very, very important. Any kind of single point approach won't work. You need a combination of active enforcement plus schemes which provide the social infrastructure which will enable this problem to be addressed. And I think the active involvement of civil society has been very helpful, because government bureaucracies, you talked about bureaucracy, I myself am a diplomat, but I have to say that government bureaucracies are not the most imaginative when it comes to dealing with issues of social development. So we found that in many cases, for the government to actually provide assistance to NGOs and civil society to get involved in implementation and monitoring has proved to be useful. And I think lastly, it would be that we also need to create an awareness in society that this, might provide some kind of temporary respite to poor people, but it doesn't help them in terms of their long-term prospects of their children. So the awareness of the importance of education as as an enabler and empowerer for children, for their future, I think is extremely important.
Ministro.
Eu penso que nós podemos contribuir muito nesse processo se nós colocarmos fatos reais.
I think we are able to contribute to this purpose if we show real concrete facts.
Não tendo nenhuma preocupação em ser politicamente correto ou incorreto.
And we should not be concerned whether we are going to be politically incorrect or politically correct.
Bom, eu vi uma realidade que me chocou profundamente na região sul do meu país, nas pequenas propriedades.
In the south of my country, I saw a certain situation which really shocked me, situation that occurred in small holdings.
Que me colocou numa dupla polêmica. A indústria fumageira, a indústria que trabalha na fabricação de cigarros.
And this presented a double challenge to me. This was the case of work in the cigarette factories.
Que é combatido por todo mundo moderno, inclusive por mim, que não fumo.
And I'm one of those who combat such a thing because I don't smoke myself, and everybody is really gang-ho against
Cerca de só na região do Rio Grande do Sul do Brasil, 20 mil pequenas propriedades que produzem o fumo, o tabaco, o material do fumo.
And just in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, the southernmost state in Brazil, there are 20,000 small farms that produce tobacco.
Gerando em torno de 100 mil empregos formais, legais.
There are about 100,000 formal jobs in this sector, just in this state.
E uma incidência grande de crianças ajudando a família na produção.
And there is a large percentage of children who help their family in the production, in the work with the tobacco.
E eu entrei em conflito com a minha consciência de metrópole, cria de grandes metrópoles.
So that represented a certain crisis for me coming from a large city.
Com essa realidade de um Brasil mais profundo, mais distante.
When I came into contact with this reality deep down in Brazil.
Eu visitei algumas pequenas propriedades e vi em algumas delas as crianças absolutamente saudáveis.
I visited some small holdings and I saw that the children were really very healthy.
As crianças que estudavam durante 6, 5 horas dia e as crianças que se sentiam felizes em contribuir com a sua família a melhorar de vida.
And those were people who were going to school for a certain number of hours during the day, and they were happy and they were contributing with their families for the work that they were doing.
Ao mesmo tempo, eu saía da propriedade, percebia todas as minhas organizações que eu defendo, querendo me colocar num paredão para me fuzilar, porque eu não podia falar aquilo.
And when I made such a statement, when I left there, I faced a barrage of criticism because of people who were telling me that I could not speak in such positive terms about that situation.
Just one clarification. People that work for him was doing that.
Yeah.
People from his own ministry and from his own organization.
Duplamente, porque eu podia ir para o paredão por causa do trabalho infantil e por causa do cigarro.
And doubly so, not only because I was speaking in such positive terms, but these very people, the people from my ministry, saying that precisely what was a compounding factor, because in this case was cigarette smoking.
Fizeram uma audiência pública, um encontro aberto, onde esperávamos cerca de 200, 300 pessoas, tinha mais de 10 mil.
And a public hearing, a public event was conducted in this regard, and a small number of people, 200-300 people were expected to attend, and there were over 10,000 people who attended this event.
E lá me questionaram, e inclusive as instituições não governamentais, os pais, as mães, as crianças, as grandes multinacionais do cigarro.
And all the people there, all the parents, the NGOs and the multinationals in the area of cigarettes, they were all questioning me.
E eu vi a realidade de como é difícil, na prática, resolver.
And then I was able to see there in the practice how this is a very difficult problem to be solved, to be tackled.
Até porque quando eu vi o meu embaixador falando que começou aos 14 anos a trabalhar, eu comecei com 13, porque eu perdi meu pai. Então, arrimo de família, eu não sei como fala em inglês.
And also our moderator here, I heard him say that he started working when he was 14 years old. In my own personal situation, I was 13 years old. My father died, and I became a main supporter of the family.
Mas a minha mãe me obrigava a estudar.
However, my mother forced me, and she made me go to school.
Eu me formei aos 21 anos de idade.
And I finished school when I was 21 years of age.
Eu fui, na prática, resultado de um mundo real que precisava produzir, precisava se alimentar e a necessidade de ser uma pessoa mais preparada. Acho que dei sorte, virei ministro.
And I had to face a double reality. I had to help to provide for my family. So I really, in a way, had no choice. I had to work. But at the same time, I wanted to improve myself. I wanted to study. And I think that somehow things may have worked properly because I ended up being a minister. I'm a minister today. So I think I worked on my education.
Então, isso me deu uma avaliação, uma convicção de que nós não podemos impor à sociedade aquilo que a realidade delas não aceita.
So what this in sum showed me is that we cannot impose upon society something that society is not ready to accept.
A criança tem que estar na escola, mas sem comer a família não consegue mandar ela para a escola.
The child has indeed to go to school, but however, without any food, it's impossible that the child can then be sent to school if the child somehow doesn't work.
Como vencer esse desafio? Estou querendo aprender aqui também.
So the question that I put then is, how can we solve this challenge? This is the question that I myself am asking here to one and all.
Yes, let's give the minister from South Africa an opportunity.
Maybe we come from a history that has made us to take strong steps because children have been exploited during the apartheid era. And that's probably why we've decided first to make it a constitutional obligation that a child who is under the age of 18, that child has rights, that child has a name, must have a nationality, a family care, parental care, appropriate or alternative care, basic nutrition, shelter, basic health care services, and social services. It's a tall order because a house has not always been a right for black people in South Africa. And therefore, we took this major step knowing very well that we are not going to be able to provide shelter, houses for each and every family. Secondly, there are these household chores, cultural activities, children fetching water from the rivers. I grew up in a village in Kiskamahook. It is children, in particular girls, must fetch water. Put a bucket in her head rather, fetching water. I must go and look after cattle. I must stay in the fields looking after those cattle and fend for myself. That's how I was brought up. And this was not because our parents wanted the situation to be like that, but because there were no water facilities for our people. And when we came into power in 1994, we are now having infrastructural program to make sure that there is water in these villages so that we eliminate this fetching of water from the rivers. So that we also have the question of land reform so that our people have places where their cattle and stock can graze. We eliminate this question of having boys looking after cattle far away. But difficulties are emerging. I can share one of those problems. As we are addressing the issues of child grants, for instance, children must get grants from the state. We now experience what our people are saying is the teenage pregnancy is on the increase, is on the rise. And the reason why it's on the rise is because people are poor, so they rather have children so that they get the child grant for their children. And it's hitting us. At the present moment, we cannot say there is empirical evidence for it, but this is what ordinary people are saying. Stop this child grant because it's making our children to get pregnant. The enforcement is also becoming a big challenge, in particular in the farms. And this is caused by the way the payments in some of the farms is made, because they pay their workers. If they are reaping, for an example, grapes, they are paid as per the number of crates that they reap. So you pay a certain amount of money. That then forces the parent to ask children during seasonal times, come and assist me so that I have more crates so that I can get more money. And hence the decision that we need to have a minimum wage for the farm workers in the Republic. You would find the same situation in the domestic homes, where a mother would bring the child because the mother must work until the mother is a bit old, and you get assistance from your own child. These are some of the things that are beginning to emerge. Of course, Program Director, coordinating government departments is not an easy exercise. It's one of the things that frustrates one, because you want to coordinate with education, you want to coordinate with police, you want to coordinate with social development, and bringing all those forces together, in particular by a Minister of Labor. I don't know in other countries, maybe in Brazil it is better. Ministers of Finance are always powerful. Ministers of Finance, they call all ministers, they will come together almost immediately because they know the consequences around their budgets. But if you are convened by a Minister of Labor, you don't see any importance in such a situation. So it's hard. It's very hard. But the other thing which is becoming sophisticated is the IT, because we now find that most of the children are abused in their homes. And right there where the parents are, where there's a computer, children play around with those computers, and we find a lot of them getting involved in pornography and picking up other very difficult things. So, which means even parents themselves need to find a way of dealing with that particular problem. So these are the challenges that we're picking up.
Well, that last problem you mentioned is not restricted to developing countries. This is a global issue.
Sure.
Now, I would like to invite...
Actually, I think that the Minister already sort of reflected on the compelling situation in which the Ministries of Labour are. My question was actually related to that only, because I was thinking that probably in South Africa and in Brazil to a large extent there's a lot of, I think, practical knowledge on how actually it works. So I was actually going to ask that how often the Minister of Labour is able to see the Minister of Education. We know that child labour perpetuates poverty, and then we also hear every time that it's key for manpower development, that these children, for harnessing the human capital, that these children are in school. So my interest was particularly from Brazil now, that how I know that when President Lula came into power in his first term, he tried to sort of, there was a great churning in terms of recasting the cash transfer program, and linking up, to the Ministry of Social Affairs, to the Ministry of Education. I know there was a great churning, also politically, that how do you achieve it? If there is something that you can share, that how practically it happens. Ministry of Labour is able to tell to the Ministry of Education that these are children in the districts who need to be in schools. And how does the ministry react, if any experiences on that? Thank you.
Sim, eu penso que o grande desafio dentro de um governo, no Brasil são 37 ministérios, é integrar o bom relacionamento entre todos.
The main challenge that we face, specifically in the case of Brazil, where there are 37 different ministries, is to coordinate the joint action of all these ministries.
Mas eu costumo dizer que quanto mais pequena, mais humilde a sua origem, mais forte é teu grito.
But what I usually say is that usually at the end, the stronger is the cry of those who are even more humble. Their cry is even stronger. I say it. This is something that I usually say.
E eu grito muito.
And I must say that I really cry and I yell and I shout.
Permanentemente.
And I do so really very frequently, permanently.
Me ouvem por bem ou não.
Whether they want it or not, they end up hearing what I have to say.
E assim é que se constrói as conquistas sociais.
And this is really the route to have any social accomplishments.
O Ministério da Educação tem, tanto com o Ministério da Ação Social, nós temos ações integradas em comissões tripartite, governo, os 3 ministérios e empresários.
We have joint action programs with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Social Affairs, and also with the participation of the private enterprises.
Empregados, empregadores e governos, 3.
So we have the joint action of employers, employees, and the government.
Nós conseguimos, em 3 anos, diminuir em 30% a incidência de trabalho infantil.
In the short time span of 3 years, we were able to reduce in 30% the occurrence of child labor.
Agora, tem uma vantagem no Ministério do Trabalho do Brasil especificamente.
In the Ministry of Labor in Brazil, we have a certain advantage, a specific advantage.
Nós temos 2 grandes fundos financeiros. O Fundo de Amparo ao Trabalhador, que tem um patrimônio de em torno de 160 bilhões de reais.
We have 2 trust funds specifically. We have one for the support of the worker with about 160 billion reais.
E o Fundo de Garantia de Tempo de Serviço, que tem um patrimônio de 230 bilhões de reais.
And the other fund is the fund that according to the time that the person has been in employment. And this fund has approximately 260 billion reais at the current time.
Just divide by 1.7 and you'll find the amount in dollars.
Esses 2 fundos são operados pelos bancos públicos.
These 2 large trust funds, they are managed by the public banks.
E eu, como ministro do Trabalho, presido os conselhos que direcionam para onde vão esse dinheiro.
And as a Minister of Labor, I am the chairperson who coordinate on how those funds are distributed and utilized.
Aí eu grito e eles me ouvem.
So that is when I shout and really, believe me, they hear me.
Finite.
I would like to, on this one, ask a question, for instance. So what the minister, as I understand, is really for not lack of money.
Yeah.
Is it the same issue in India? The funds, the government have the resources to combat this issue. It's really the complexity of it, right?
Yes, I would say that's also our experience. We have seen that, we have a number of schemes spread across a number of ministries. And the challenge is to mainstream all these projects and schemes so that they also include a child labor element. For instance, the Education Ministry handles the program for education for all and the right to education. So providing free education to all children from the ages of ages of 6 to 14. The Rural Development Ministry handles the scheme for the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which provides the cash assistance to people below the poverty line for 100 guaranteed days of employment in the rural areas to one person in each family. And then you have the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima scheme, which is a kind of an insurance program, a cashless insurance program, where the government provides insurance cover for health coverage to people below the poverty line without their paying stipends. And this covers a certain amount of treatment in a year. And then you have the actual programs for child labor, which are implemented by the Ministry of Labor and Employment. And the issue is, how do you get these to cohere and to converge in ways which will affect all these issues, of poverty, child labor elimination, providing some kind of guaranteed employment, reducing agricultural vulnerabilities, where you have small land holdings, some people without land holdings, and an agrarian economy which to some extent is still dependent on the weather. Where if you have monsoons. So in some year, if you have a poor monsoon, the distress levels can be higher, and that leads to other problems. So there, the new National Rural Employment Guarantee Act is making a difference. And what we've tried to do is to create this core group of all these ministries to look at these issues from the point of view of convergence. Because at some level, though they are manifestations which show in different ways, at some level they all stem from the same basic cause, and that is lack of social and economic development, and basically lack of economic development. So this has been a challenge, and it's not that we are able to work this coherence very smoothly, but we are striving towards this. I think the other issue is that, as he mentioned, child labor now, for instance, in India, in factories and organized places of employment has come down substantially, and that is accepted even by ILO reports and studies. But it's largely taking place in household settings now. And much of it has to do with also traditional forms of employment in India. Because if the father was a weaver, the child learned weaving at home, and that became his occupation. If the father was a carpenter, the child learned carpentry from the father, and that became his occupation. And so in dealing with this issue, we have to see that we don't displace traditional methods of self-generating employment without providing alternatives to people. I think that's a key challenge, because there are traditional forms of work which the artisan class in India particularly have engaged in for many, many years. And the children have picked these up as part of their engagement in the family activity. So if we ensure that this is completely stopped, as the minister says, it creates problems. But if the children can go to school, and then after school they can train on some of these activities or contribute, it's a different issue. So the challenge is to fashion something which will be sensitive to local conditions and not disrupt local economies. I think that's very important.
Unfortunately, we have taken a different view precisely because of our history. Anything that is harmful to children, and anything, even if it's at home, children must be allowed to go to school.
Yes, that is what
children must be allowed to play. Children must be allowed to develop as children. We take a stronger view because I come from a culture that I've already described. But it doesn't mean that it must continue. We need to find a way of making children to be children. In relation to the civil society back at home, which is we have a very strong civil society movement. By the way, we fund also part of that development through our NEDLEC structures, which is National and Economic Development Labour Council, which is an act of parliament which forces us to engage in social dialogue. So we have institutionalized social dialogue in South Africa. And this plan that I'm talking about has not been developed by only government. We developed it with our civil society organizations, with trade unions and employers' organizations, because we do not believe that we can succeed without all of us participating in this scourge. In relation to the Minister of Education, we are part of what we call Human Development Council, which is led by the Deputy President of the Republic, Kgalema Motlanthe. It forces us to meet even if we don't like each other. And so we have no alternative but to meet, because we are part of the Human Resource Development Council, and also we belong in the same economic cluster. Even the Minister of Finance cannot run away from us. So money is certainly not the problem. The problem is to eradicate child labor completely.
Mm-hmm. Do you have...
Right. I think that one sort of last question from me would be my interest to learn that how in the Hague conference now, to learn from all three of you, because I strongly believe that the success or the outcomes of the Hague Conference, the International Conference on Child Labour, and you also know it for sure, that much of it, sort of the success depends upon that what is the kind of the political commitment that these IPSA countries make towards this Hague Conference. And I'm just curious to learn that, one, as I said at the very outset, in the spirit of the IPSA summit just concluded in Brasilia, how you see in the roadmap there is a strong sort of content and a kind of what I say, a kind of strong moral voice and content from the IPSA countries that it sort of grows, and how you aim to contribute in that, and where do you see, because the time is sort of very limited now, from now until 10th and 11th of May. So I'm just curious to learn that how the IPSA position formulates.
Just to complement the question, maybe, do you have the IPSA countries shared experience among them about this issue specifically? Because I know that they are expanding cooperation. I don't know if this issue is already in the radar.
So the roadmap 2016 on the elimination of worst forms of child labor.
Worst forms of child labor. Right. I don't think as yet that it has been engaging the IPSA, but I think it's a very useful issue for us to engage on, because at some level, even though we are at different levels of development and the problem may be more acute in some countries than others, at some level we share certain broad characteristics. And it would be useful to share experiences and to pool to see how we can pool our experiences and what emerges from that. I think it would be extremely useful for the labor ministers of IPSA to get together on this issue.
I cannot agree more, as I've already indicated that this is one area where I think we have not done well, as ministers of labor in particular, is coming together. Mm-hmm. And I think working together we can do more, and sharing these experiences, because there are very interesting developments that I have just learned from my colleagues as I'm sitting here. So why can't we share these experiences? You are right, time is too short between now and the Hague conference. I don't even know whether I have the authority of the president to attend. But because I've just got it from when I was in the ILO, that there's a Hague conference. And so as soon as we get more details, I think it would be important for us to come together.
Well, I think that we may have... yes.
Brazil.
Brazil had to say
you want to say something?
Yes. Okay. tenho que esperar o tradutor.
Em termos de cooperação entre os três
Tá.
países.
Eu concordo inteiramente com a proposta, eu acho que precisamos aprofundar. Eu costumo dizer que um dia numa vida é um século, depende de como a gente vive esse dia. Então, às vezes...
Yes, I think that we do need to get deeper in this work, and I think that I have an expression that I use that is say, a day sometimes is the equivalent of a whole life lived, according to how much one is able to perform in a day.
Eu só quero registrar que nós temos que entender cada realidade diferente. É muito fácil cobrar de um país em desenvolvimento aquilo que há 50, 100 anos atrás alguns outros que estavam em desenvolvimento não faziam.
It is very hard to make demands and to put demands on underdeveloped, developing countries. It's very easy to try to go to the undeveloped countries and try to have as standards patterns that existed 50, 60 years ago, which not even in these countries what is being required of us existed 50 or 60 years ago.
Essa compreensão é fundamental para erradicar o trabalho infantil. É compreender a realidade da autonomia de cada nação no seu tempo.
So this is one important aspect, to understand and respect the autonomy and the sovereignty of each nation in the work that the nation is carrying out.
Well, with that, I believe the ministers their schedules are very tight, so we are not going to do what we normally do, is to open for questions. And since this obviously, it's clear that I think this gathering here may have produced at least a consequence, which is the three countries now probably focusing on labor issues, the ministers of labor. But I would like to conclude this by thanking very, very much Ambassador Shankar for taking time, or very busy schedule, to join us in representation of the Minister of Labor of our country, in representation of India, Minister Carlos Roberto Lupi, also muito obrigado, and to Minister Midlana from South Africa, and my friend Sadhun Joshi. Thank you very much for being here, and see you next time. The Wilson Center is your home. Please come back to our events. Thank you.
Thank you.